I'm Jess Thorpe, the research lead here at Nimbus 90. It's an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Kyle Grant, founder of OxWash, joining us today as our guest disruptor. So Kyle's packed quite a lot in already. An ex-NASA scientist, solving the problems of laundry, making laundry quite cool as well, and solving problems in a sustainable way. Kyle's also been ranked as a Forbes 30 under 30. He's a social entrepreneur. And Ben Legg, our first guest disruptor, highlighted some of what was happening at OxWash when we interviewed him a few weeks ago. So Kyle, it's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I am going to ask you a few questions about what's been happening over the last 6 weeks in just a second. The theme today is Tales from the Pivot Masters, and that's where we want to get the day off to a good start for a lot of people that are joining us with, I guess, an experience of how a company has responded to change. And we all know that the changes happening at the moment are unpredictable and radical. So we'll dive into that in just 1 second. But before that, can you give us a bit of background and just tell us all about how OxWash started?
Yeah, sure. So thank you very much for the introduction. My background is very much in engineering, and I'm a massive space nerd, space cadet. Spent many years working on life support systems at NASA and SpaceX, and then came back to the UK to do a PhD at Oxford University at the kind of interface between life science and engineering, which I find fascinating. And it was in my final year of my PhD when I was washing the rugby team kit. I was playing for a team and we used to all take turns in our college laundry room that I realized this is completely screwed. All the machines are either broken, there's a machine kind of coming out from the wall, vibrating its way towards me, chemicals everywhere, and all of my friends on the WhatsApp chat saying, I've got the same problem or worse, or they're booked up until like 3018. So I realized, oh, this is an interesting problem to solve that I never thought of. So I kind of started the business as a project on the side of my PhD to see if it had legs. Got a delivery backpack off eBay, spray painted it blue, Tipex OxWash around the side of it to kind of make it obvious what we did, or what I did, and had a Google form where students could basically, please do my laundry. They'd leave it at their college reception. I'd pick it up in my backpack, bring it home, wash it, and then take it back. And it kind of went from there. So pretty humble beginning, actually in a shipping container. So that was somewhat 2 years ago now, which is pretty crazy.
So I love the DIY element there. Just get out there, do it. And also I think quite a few people listening and people are just joining, by the way, as you're kind of introducing yourself, will also think finding the time to start a business in the final year of a PhD is also, is also quite unusual. So clearly things have been going well over the last 2 years, and then I guess over the last 6 weeks everything's changed. So can you sort of talk us through maybe kind of leading up to the last 6 weeks, and then what's been going on, as kind of lockdown has occurred?
Sure, yeah. So to give a bit of background, the business was founded in Oxford, and we also have we call them lagoons. These are our like hyper space age laundry processing hubs near city centres. And we also have one in Cambridge, and are looking for the area to set one up in London in the near future as well. And the plan kind of in early 2020 was to get Cambridge up and running at full speed, expand Oxford with electric vans. We currently use electric bikes for everything that we do, as well as start processing in, round the clock. And then also starting to move into West London, so kind of High Street, Kensington, South Ken, that kind of region, and serving that demographic and geography as well. And then a nasty little virus came along and screwed up our plans enormously. And if I'm being brutally honest, we saw an enormous change in the way we do business. It's quite terrifying because most of our business comes from individuals and small businesses, so cafes, restaurants, bars, things like that. And what happened, when the lockdown hit, is that all of our business kind of dried up from both segments. because people as individuals are at home. They can do their own laundry because they're in trackies, like I am now. Might not look like it, but I'm very comfortable. And you don't need suits and dresses and blouses and things dry cleaned because no one's wearing them to work. And then on the other side, businesses aren't open, so we don't need to do Airbnb linen for Airbnb, or we don't need to do chef's wear for restaurants. So that was pretty terrifying to see that kind of revenue drop off a cliff. But then something quite interesting and somewhat magical in hindsight happened, in that the NHS called us probably now 3.5 weeks ago and basically said, we can see you're a laundry. Do you have any spare capacity? Because we are about to be inundated with a demand for scrubs and personal protection equipment and uniforms that we would like to be washed, disinfected, and then reused. One of the big problems that everyone will have seen in the news recently is that the supply of PPE is very, very low. However, if you can get the right items and just use them again and again and again and wash them instead of having disposable items, it actually makes a lot more sense. And then the supply and demand curve is flattened. So that's what we've been doing in Oxford and starting in Cambridge, is that we're working with the NHS on several different fronts to make sure that they have disinfected scrubs and aprons, both in primary healthcare, like GP practices and care homes. And they're also setting up super hubs, which are these kind of mobile small hospitals for COVID-19 positive patients to segregate them away from normal healthcare patients, as well as hotels that have been requisitioned by the NHS for key workers to isolate in, or if they have to come from a further distance, they stay there for their kind of 5-day shifts, as well as also looking to do hospitals themselves. And as of kind of last week on Friday, we started doing the scrubs, uniforms and PPE for the vaccine trial, which you may have seen in the news, of which myself and my COO are both actually participants in. Tom, my COO, gets jabbed tomorrow, later today, which is very exciting. So we're super proud to be supporting those guys. So we've had to do an enormous shift into healthcare and pivot very hard, not only as the customer looks very different. It's not, like a small business owner that just needs a hand with their tea towels. It's a massive healthcare giant that has procurement pathways and standards of disinfection that we need to prove. Luckily, the technology that we've developed for our original focus, which was low temperature, hyper sustainable laundry, is totally applicable to the healthcare market. We just never looked at it because usually small businesses need to exist for 2 to 3 years before they're able to tender. So that's all been accelerated. We're now through the NHS procurement pipeline, doing all the microbiological testing and stuff, which is super exciting because I'm a massive nerd and I love Petri dishes. So it's really exciting. And that's where we are at the moment. I've got some really cool projects coming online next week.
That's incredible. And I think, again, for people that have probably just, just joined us or joined us in the last few minutes, I think hearing how you've gone from a situation where, as you said, not only your revenue has collapsed, but that must have been quite difficult seeing, your clients, people that people that your team are interacting with, you've got that rapport and those relationships suddenly having to shut up shop effectively. I mean, that must have been difficult on many fronts. It's not just the revenue, it's the personal aspects as well, I guess. I mean, just sort of going back to healthcare as well, the first thing that you said there that really that really kind of made me think is that the fact that the NHS called you. Why do you think that was? I mean, is it to do with your brand? I understand you're very recognizable and kind of part of the scene in Oxford. I don't know if that's, that had something to do with it. What do you think happened there?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And your previous point around kind of our clients being very close to us is absolutely relevant and poignant as well. And we can talk about some of the ways that we're hoping to support them maybe a little later. But I think the main reason why we got the call is twofold. It's number one, you're absolutely right. We try to be a really strong brand where we operate, rather than traditional kind of app models like Laundrette, I Hate Ironing, that do large areas and lots of kind of generic advertising. We're very, very focused on each geography that we operate and embed within the community there. We hire local teams for each lagoon who know their community well and know how to kind of help as much as they can and spread the word. But I think it's also that the NHS were desperate in the sense that a lot of laundries that typically do healthcare are also in the hospitality sector. So they'll do hotels and things like that on a big scale, like the Marriott or Hilton and things like that. So what we saw is that a lot of the medium-sized laundries just shut up shop and furloughed all of their staff and kind of just said, well, it's not worth it. And then the big players like Ellis and Johnson Stallbridge, who are the large enterprise players with the NHS contracts, couldn't deal with the increased volume of PPE that needed to be washed. They couldn't wash them at a low enough temperature with the right chemistry because it's quite different. And also they were too slow. So one of the things that you've got to be able to do if you want to reuse the PPE is that if I give you my scrubs for washing, I can't get them back a week later. I need them the next day for my next shift. And sure, maybe you can have a few like copies of each scrub, maybe 3 sets. But if you still have to wait 7 days for each set to come back, then you need to have kind of 7, 8, 9 sets of scrubs. It just doesn't make sense. So we got the call because we were local. So it was the COO of the Oxford University Hospitals Foundation Trust that said, look, I know you guys, seen you around. Can you help out? Can you do like a next day turnaround? And we were like, yes, that is the whole point of the business, is that we're local and we can just serve you up the road rather than, 50, 60, 70 miles away. So I think that was probably the main reason.
That also sort of makes me think about some of the other challenges, I guess, in sort of servicing healthcare. I mean, so it sounds like your existing process was very appropriate, which is great. But I guess as this business has unfolded, I mean, the learning curve for you must have been, incredible. Is there anything else that you've learned from servicing healthcare in particular? Anything else you've had to iron out? No pun intended, but as you've progressed.
Yeah, so this is quite funny actually. So the laundry itself, when it's in the machine, like I said, we had kind of nailed, and it's quite simple in our bread and butter. But until this pandemic struck, we were kind of startup hippie, wearing shorts and t-shirts like this one, cycling around the city, very friendly. And now we're like head to toe in hazmat suits with goggles, gloves, visors, all this kind of stuff. So it's an enormous change operationally for our team, because they're very comfortable walking around in hoodies and stuff, and now they're in full grade 3 PPE with all sorts of new processes around when we collect items from our customers as well as the healthcare clients. We put them in dissolvable bags now, which then mean they're isolated from where we collect them to when they're disinfected in our washing machines. And all these kind of things might seem trivial, but when you compound them all on top of each other, it's quite a shock. And our team have just been phenomenal at adopting all these new processes on the fly, and really just nailing them. And I'm super proud of how quickly that they've done that, because I think that a lot of other companies and teams around the country that just decided to kind of duck their heads in the sand and use the furlough scheme really could have done more. But luckily our culture and our team lended itself really, really well to diving in and trying to help as best we could.
Thank you. I mean, and to pick up on your last point, let's talk about your team. What is it like leading a team through this type of change? It sounds like they've responded incredibly. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm learning this on the fly, right? Like I was institutionalized in a massive space agency, then a big space company, and then a world-leading university. So I was quite comfortable following instructions and filling forms and following the tape. So this has been a massive learning curve for me, leading a team of just, myself, my backpack, and a friend in a shipping container, to now, nearly 20 staff across the UK in just 2 years. And for me, the crux of it comes down to being incredibly honest and open with your team and transparent. So everyone in the team knows everything that goes on, with everything from our raise to what we're thinking about for EMI options, to the calls that come in for new customers, to our strategy. And we ask our team what they think and get feedback very regularly, because it's the power of the collective that really drives us. It's not, Tom and I dictating this, that, and the other. Each of our team, like on paper, and if you met them in the street, you'd probably be like, this isn't a fit for a startup. But actually, they're all absolute weapons, rock stars. It's phenomenal working with them every day, and having fun is the second thing, is that you have to enjoy it and really, really want to go to work and be creative and have purpose. And I think there are several different ways you can do that. But for us, it's just primarily the sustainability and the community. Obviously now with the healthcare work, that's moving into hygiene, but the sustainability is still absolutely core. And a lot of people that have no God-given right to be working in a laundry company can really buy into that, because it's a very clear mission to eliminate the impact of laundry on the environment and therefore the communities around us. So I think that's the key way to lead, is give people a real mission to get behind.
Thank you. And I think we'll return to that later, because I think there's if we can reflect on that towards the end of the interview, maybe some of the major changes. But I want to come back to something else you said, because it's really important that, as quite rightly, we don't forget your existing clients, who've really where your business began, and those relationships that you've built. So what does this pivot mean for your previous market segments? How are you supporting some of those clients, like you mentioned? It'd be great to hear about that.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. We've been kind of thinking about this long and hard over the last couple of months, because from our point of view, we do think that the recovery will be relatively swift for our markets in terms of individuals. So as soon as people are able to go back to work, they'll do so hopefully in a relatively big way, because like me, they might have cabin fever and want to go out, get stuck in again, either in the office or the workplace or wherever it is. And therefore a kind of B2C segment where we do a lot of domestic laundry, bedding, dry cleaning, things like that will hopefully recover, and we can support people again there. The small businesses that we work with is more interesting, because that's totally segment specific. So we did a lot of work with Airbnb customers and hosts, as well as management companies before the kind of lockdown hit. And we predict that market's going to be quite slow to recover compared to something like a hairdressers, for example. So we do a lot of barbershops, nail salons and hairdressers and things like that as well. So what we're trying to do is work out primarily which of the segments are going to recover quickest, but also bring in new kind of cash flow incentives and things to help our small business customers and friends get back on their feet. The obvious thing that we can do is allow people to use our service and then defer payments for a period of time. Usually it would be 7 to 14 days for an invoice payment, but we're looking to do kind of 60 or 90 days for like a range of different customers, so that if they're a restaurant, they can open their doors, slowly get business back in, use their revenue to, remarket that they're open and really ramp up quicker than having to pay their laundry bill right then, but then they pay a little later. So we're introducing that kind of cash flow recovery scheme next week, which will be brilliant, to try and preload that with customers so that they don't have to think about that cost for the first couple of months of recovery, which we think would be really, really good. As well as cross-promoting what they're doing and trying to build a community so that we can tell our other customers who's open for business, where should they be eating, where should they be catching up with their friends, that kind of thing. But it is, like you said, a work in progress, and we're just trying to do everything we can to help, really.
Absolutely. And as you've highlighted there, it's about looking at every process within that chain. I mean, and you've talked about payments. That's going to be, I think, critical for many businesses as they're adapting to, real changes in customer flows, footfall, all of these things, depending on what premises can open and what can't. So I think being responsive to that, do you think that your sort of size, what it enables you to be more responsive, or, the fact that your team have got these great relationships?
Yeah, no, both. Absolutely. I think if we were a lot larger, it's much harder to pivot and be reactive to these things, because you have to go all the way up to head office, and then they have to say, yes, that works for your little kind of geography. The way we've built the business, where we have kind of a general manager in each city, and that's their baby, and the lagoon is theirs, they hire their team, that kind of thing, lends itself more to allowing them to be like hyper flexible. So Julia, our GM in Cambridge, spotted like a local grant to help us with sterilizing not only the linen and laundry that we do, but also using our technology to sterilize kind of hospital rooms and ambulances and things like that, using something called ozone. And she took it off her back to just apply for that grant, and then told Tom and I halfway through, oh, I need a bit of information for this. And we were like, perfect, absolutely, that's exactly what we want, is for our team to really take the initiative to help and get these grants in so we can then flip them and start helping other people. But I think that trying to keep that structure as we grow is going to be really, really difficult, but we're going to try and bake it in early. That's the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps if I interview you, I don't know, in a year's time when we'll cover some of those issues, because I think for every business as they're growing, how to keep a culture that is as strong as yours. And I think that, I'm sure for everybody listening, that's really coming through, is an interesting strategic point. That said, let's just sort of go on to the last thing. Before I ask you, what I think is a final question, we've been talking for ages. I've got a couple of questions coming through on the chat. So for everybody that is listening to Kyle this morning, I'm sure that a lot of what he said is sort of starting to spark these questions. Now everyone's had their coffee, so please do add some questions onto the special Q&A box, and I will try and get through as many as I can with Kyle in just 1 second. I know a really good questions come through about government procurement, which is basically a whole massive conversation. So we'll flip to that in just one second. But before that, I think let's have a bit of reflection. What has been the biggest change for you personally and your team?
For me personally, it will definitely be not being able to lead from the front as much. So something that we decided pretty early on when social distancing was implemented was that we would split our operational team in each city in half, and have half the team still working in the lagoon and on the bikes and operational, and then the other half from home, doing a lot of value add, either supporting our teams digitally, because we use all of our software online for doing that and communicating and doing logistics and things. But then Tom and I made the decision that we needed to isolate ourselves in case we got virus and then couldn't be, leading the ship, as it were, and steering with the rudder. And that's been really, really hard. We've kind of gone from being completely out of the loop to now spending half the time kind of in the lagoon with the teams, and then half the time working from home, which is better. But for me, I really, really like leading from the front, problem solving, rolling up my sleeves. If a machine needs a tweak with a program, or if there's a GP practice that needs an extra drop, like getting on the bike and getting it done. So it's very, very hard for me to just sit behind a MacBook and kind of operate remotely. I don't find that very comfortable. But we're getting there. I think everyone's having to learn how to lead teams from over the wire. And it comes down to just trying to be yourself through the calls, which is, I know sounds really like obvious, but people, like especially your team, notice when you're nervous and when you don't enjoy, kind of sitting around and trying to do everything remotely. So I'm learning to be myself more through a computer screen, which I think the team really help, and doing fun stuff rather than just meetings, so quizzes and Pictionary and bingo and all sorts of stuff like that, which I'm sure everyone's done. Is super cool for keeping the culture there. I think the hardest thing for our team has definitely been more the personal side of the lockdown. What we've tried to do is give our teams as much stability in the workplace as possible. And that's not only their job security, but also the structures and procedures and all that kind of stuff. So we actually have more touch points, more meetings, more one-on-ones now with each of our team than we did before, which I think has actually been a real benefit, because up until this point, it's like chaotic growth mode. You don't have time to sit down at the same time every week and have an hour conversation with each of your team. But now you can. And it's been really, really good for Tom and I and our GMs to really understand what our team need, want, and their concerns, and kind of nip them in the bud. But I think for them, the home life is definitely the hardest part, because where a lot of our colleagues, friends and family are furloughed or working from home and taking it easy, they're out on the front line in hazmat suits in these kind of deserted city centres, in GP clinics and vaccine trial centres. And it is a big shift. And I think that they've done incredibly well to step up and just be like, yep, I'm comfortable with this, going into the hot zone when, I was hired to ride a bike in the sunshine. It's very, very different. So I think they've done incredibly well to step up there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the questions coming through actually reflecting people are sharing that views. I think talking about your team and sort of what they're going through and how they've responded is certainly really inspiring for people. We do have quite a few questions now, and I think you're going to love some of them because they are about the tech and they're about the geeky scientific side, which I know we'll cover. So sort of 2 points on that. We've got a question from Steve Wright, who wants to know about whether the tech can be licensed for consumer washing machines. And there's another question which is about washing hygienically at 20 degrees and at cold temperatures, when I think we've all understood that hygiene is high temperatures. So there's two elements there, the consumer washing side and then the temperature side. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to cover the two, the common ancestry of both questions is the technology that sterilizes at low temperatures. So there are several different ways to do this. You could use gamma radiation, you could use UV, and things like that. And we kind of looked at them. Using gamma radiation in the laundry is not recommended when you're putting stuff down the drain. So we didn't look at that too seriously. UV is interesting, but very hard to integrate into washing machines because you need line of sight for that to work. And the tumbling motion of machines doesn't really lend itself well to that. And then the final one that we have adopted is a technology that I used to use when I was both at SpaceX and NASA for sterilizing payloads that would go to the International Space Station, as well as purging the life support systems before kind of filling them, topping them up, which is called ozone. So this everyone will have heard of in terms of the ozone hole, which we've slowly been minimizing over the last 2 decades. But actually ozone is an incredibly powerful disinfecting molecule. It's basically an oxygen molecule with an extra oxygen atom. So it's 3 oxygens that is highly reactive, and any organic substance like these bananas, for example, if you put these in the presence of ozone, they get oxidized and immediately degrade. And we designed a system whereby we can use ozone and bubble it up through the laundry as it's being washed. These systems have existed kind of on the market on and off the last few decades, but no one's really got them to work properly, especially at low temperatures and with specific chemistry that works with the ozone. So we've had to spend a lot of time kind of working out how, one, to get the ozone in the washing machine properly, and then 2, how do you make sure it's safe to use? Because if it oxidizes bacteria and viruses and fungus and things like that, how do you make sure it doesn't oxidize your staff and your team? So we've done a lot of work there and have some great engineering partners in the industrial laundry space that have helped us with that. Can it be adapted for commercial machines? Is really an answer to the second part of that, which is the safety. You possibly could, but ozone needs to be used in a very, very specific way, and you need to be trained. And there's quite a lot of auxiliary equipment around making sure that levels of ozone in the air that's being breathed doesn't go above a certain level and things like that. And also the tech to be able to generate ozone from the air, as well as then bubble it up through the machines, is quite large at the moment, and miniaturization hasn't really occurred to the level where it needs to. So we think that we may look at licensing that in the future, but currently we prefer to keep that kind of Zeus Thunderbolt in our own quiver rather than putting it out in Bosch, Miele, and all those other guys' quivers for now. But it's certainly a very good question.
Thank you. We've got a question come through from Jerry Osborne. This came through a while ago, and as I mentioned, it's about government procurement, which affects so many people and smaller businesses, as you mentioned. So Jerry says, love the way that you have pivoted towards an extremely worthy cause, and we've had quite a few comments on that already. I'll read some out in a sec. Do you have any tips for getting through the government service sector procurement systems?
That is such a good question. Bear in mind, I didn't know anything about this like 2 months ago, right? So the way it works for the NHS, which might lend itself well as an example for other government sectors, is that there's this devolution of the funds from government all the way down to, in the NHS, it's 2 organisations. In primary healthcare, it's usually the CCGs, which are the kind of GP practice group in each county. And then for the hospitals, they're usually part of a federation or a foundation trust. And usually you'll have to go and speak to somebody in procurement in either of those 2 points. The way we did it after we realized how this worked is a lot more like Slack. which is we got GP practices to start using our service for free, giving us feedback and for us to just help them out from the bottom. And then got to a point where we were doing quite a few different practices, and then went to the CCG and said, oh, by the way, quite a few of your practices are already using this and loving it. Would you like to roll it out to your other GP practices in your network? And that's exactly what Slack did with getting teams to use Slack, then going to the enterprise above them and saying, look, 60% of your teams are using Slack, you should get the enterprise version. But also trying to find who are the key people in those decision-making units. As well. We made the mistake actually of only having one point of contact within the NHS procurement team, the COO, like I mentioned, in the Hospitals Foundation Trust. And the poor chap actually got coronavirus and got sent home without his work laptop and phone. He was totally fine, thankfully, and wasn't very symptomatic, but got swab tested and sent home. So we lost our point of contact for a week and a half, which obviously is crazy. So it's very, very important if you're navigating these channels to have more than one. And obviously they're all stretched super thin. I think the key thing to understand as well in government at the moment is that a lot of the kind of red tape that existed before is now gone. So it's worth trying to go through the procurement kind of pathways now to get onto these systems like Oracle, where you can then become a preferred procurement or a preferred supplier or whatever it is. While this situation's in play, because I think after this like lockdown has been lifted, the red tape will come back. So it's an interesting window in time to be able to get in there. I hope that helps, but again, I think every different government organization is very different.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's really useful. I think just hearing people's experiences, and as you said, it is an unusual time. Interesting point about the red tape there, which I think I can envisage people nodding their heads at home, thinking, yeah, that's probably a good prediction. I just have to read a couple of things out to you because. These aren't questions, these are just comments. So Louisa said, brilliant call. I've got to jump onto our daily stand-up now, but awesome webinar. I hope OxWash comes to Surrey. Stay safe, everyone. I think, thank you so much, Louise. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And, we've also had another comment. This is from the Word Thing Services too. What an amazing man and an amazing team. So really resonating there. And the purpose of these Chief Disruptor Breakfast Clubs is to do exactly this, to make people sort of feel that there's a lot of positivity in their day. So thank you so much. I'm going to ask one more question, or one or two if we've got time. So, and this is from Arena again. Well done, Kyle. Will you still go ahead with expanding your business to London? Thank you and good luck.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the original plans was to set up, like I said, a lagoon in West London earlier this year. We did a seed raise that we're just kind of closing up at the moment, which was enabling us to do that. And the plan is actually to set up a kind of micro hub in London very soon. Will just be bikes, kind of the storage and a team down there, and we'll then use electric vans to bring the items back up to Oxford and Cambridge for processing overnight, and then bring them back down the next day. Because right now getting machines and all the engineering that we need to do to modify them for our process is very difficult. Our manufacturers for the machines are in Spain, where we get our kind of chemistry dosing units that we modify and implement are in Italy. And all these countries are, still locked down and unable to manufacture. So what we're going to have to do is put logistics teams in London to do collections and deliveries hyper locally, and then still process the items where we currently have machines, and then do a bit of a transit until such time as we can get operational and start deploying lagoons again quite quickly. That's a point that actually Ben Legg made on the phone to me about a week and a half ago, which is one of the original business model ideas was to containerize our lagoons. So actually put all of the washing machines, technology and processes into shipping containers, and then ship them wherever you need the laundry to be done, put them down, plug them into the solar and the water, and then off you go washing. And I think that now more than ever, we're thinking, actually, that is a phenomenal idea that we should revisit again. We even did all the engineering, CAD designs, mock-ups, and built a full prototype in Spain, but then moved down the route of, taking old industrial units and renovating them. But now I think actually that would have been a really useful thing to have on the back of a truck.
Absolutely. And I mean, that we're going to turn to space now, because we have had a question come through, and I just feel we have to do it. There's two things. Firstly, someone said, excellent, I can say I've had breakfast with a rocket scientist, which again I think is marvelous. So that certainly inspired people, but actually we've had a question come through, and I think, thinking about the longer term, how do you see humans and businesses using and engaging with space, from all of your experience in NASA? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it splits now. I think in the past, NASA had, especially in America and everyone's hearts and minds, a bit of a monopoly, in the sense that, the first astronauts on the moon were NASA astronauts, and Space Shuttle STS astronauts were also from NASA. And then obviously Russia had its own kind of cosmonaut program as well, and now China does too with the Taikonauts. And so human space flight has often been the realm of governments only. But now more than ever, you're seeing companies like SpaceX from Elon Musk, and Blue Origin from Jeff Bezos, Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson's enterprise, pushing into the private sector the ability for individuals such as ourselves to go to space, either as tourists or as commercial astronauts. And Boeing recently announced their kind of first intake of commercial astronauts, like commercial pilots, which is super exciting. So I actually think that human spaceflight will transition very hard into the private sector, but actually further, what I see is quite, fascinating and eye-opening and awe-inspiring space exploration will become robotic. So exploring the outer solar system as well as the inner solar system with robotic kind of astronauts, where in the same way that you can have a drone pilot that flies, a Nighthawk from Milton Keynes that's flying over Afghanistan, you'll have astronauts that are sat in chairs with Xbox controllers in Houston, driving robots around the surface of Venus or Mars or wherever it is, and exploring robotically. And that will definitely be done by governments still. And you see a lot of kind of programs coming out of NASA to really push that forwards. I do truly believe that NASA will just become more of a far out exploration robotics agency rather than flying humans to space. It just doesn't make sense economically for them to do that with taxpayers' money anymore, when companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin and things can do it more cost effectively because there's more competition. But it'll be interesting to see what happens there, for sure.
Absolutely, and thank you for your views on that. I think as you were talking, you could certainly see again that there's a few space geeks listening as well, and that's sort of exciting to touch on that. We have got to draw to a close in terms of the questions. There was still a sort of a few unanswered, which I can sort of bring to you offline. But I really think there's been huge resonance. Thank you very much for your commitment, also with the vaccine trials as well. I mean, that's quite incredible, and absolutely good luck to, is Tom, isn't it, later on today? I mean, I'm sure that everybody will be thinking about that, and a real sign of your commitment. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I think everybody else has enjoyed listening. Thank you so much, and I'm going to hand back over to Eva. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jess and Carl. Absolutely fascinating. I've actually been WhatsApping Ben Legg to say thank you so much. That was, as a person who got a D in her physics A level, there was never any hope for me heading towards NASA and everything you've achieved. But I think it's been absolutely fascinating. I know one of the questions that we weren't able to get to, Carl, very much was, the skills and abilities that you have that recognise you as one of the Forbes 30 under 30, and so much else that you've achieved. So we wish you the best of luck, and everything you're doing through that call from the NHS is absolutely fabulous, and we wish you the best moving forward in these very strange times, as many of your previous customers hopefully come back to the fore as well. We do hope that our listeners today have very much enjoyed what's being discussed and also found it very useful. We're going to bring many of our guest disruptors to Chief Disruptor Live on the 2nd of June. That's a Tuesday, and we'd love you to be with us for that. What it's all about is pivot to a new future. It's interesting, we put this together back in January, and actually many of the things that we were going to cover in it, the masterclasses, the panels, the breakouts, the demos, and masterclasses were there already, if you like, but they've very much been reviewed and re-looked at to ensure that they're very, very relevant for our members who are going through such challenging times right now. So as always, we'll be there to support and connect change makers and disruptors and really help them to equip with real actionable insights and strategies.